Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Poetry Thursday, and what a beautiful day it is to talk about beautiful poetry. Because as I am making this video, it is the first day of summer, so technically Poetry Tuesday. But we have to plan ahead when we're making videos and whatnot. And once again, I do have a poem from the LGBT community during this period of Pride that I've decided to make Pride-based poems, or decided to highlight Pride-based poets. And today's poem is about God and a request about God that's a little bit unusual. I am referring to Prayer Oracion by Francisco X. Alarcon. It was actually published in 2002. For those who don't know, Francisco Alarcon is a Chicano poet. He is gay, which is why I'm highlighting him, although I probably would have highlighted him even without the LGBT qualifier, because his poems are really good. He won multiple awards for his poetry, and he published a couple books throughout his life. He lived between the 1950s and 2016, so he died pretty recently. And one interesting thing about his life, one unfortunate thing about his life, is that he was accused of murder in California. The police unfairly targeted him because, as he noted, he is a Latino man. And so they just assumed that he did the murder that they were investigating, and it was later found out that it was actually just a white guy who the police had typically ignored. And a lot of people have also said that the actions of the police were homophobic in nature too. So discriminatory behavior, and yet another good reason to abolish the police. But he reflected on that experience in some of his poetry. But surely being accused of murder would reflect on all of your future poetry, kind of guide how you see the world. Definitely worth checking out some of his earlier poetry versus some of his later poetry to get a feel for some of the things that he wrote about. But without further ado, let's talk about Prayer Oracion. I'll read it, I'll do a little bit of an analysis, and we will move on from there. Prayer Oracion. I want a God as my accomplice who spends nights in houses of ill repute and gets up late on Saturdays. A God who whistles through the streets and trembles before the lips of his lover. A God who waits in line at the entrance of movie houses and likes to drink café au lait. A God who spits blood from tuberculosis and doesn't even have enough for bus fare. A God knocked unconscious by the billy club of a policeman at a demonstration. A God who pisses out of fear before the flaring electrodes of torture. A God who hurts to the last bone and bites the air in pain. A jobless God, a striking God, a hungry God, a fugitive God, an exiled God, an enraged God. A God who longs from jail for a change in the order of things. I want a more godlike God. So that was Prayer Oracion by Francisco X. Alarcon. In terms of analysis, there is a bit to talk about with this poem. From the look of the poem, from the outside of the poem, the summary appears to be that the narrator is talking about the changes that they would like to see in God. Ultimately summarizing that they want a more godlike God. So they want this God person, this God figure to change and represent perhaps different kinds of people. They say they want a God as my accomplice who spends nights in houses of ill repute and gets up late on Saturdays. A God who waits in line at the entrance of movie houses and likes to drink café au lait. A God who spits blood from tuberculosis and doesn't even have enough for bus fare. So kind of a down on their luck kind of God who represents the common people. Although the more that you read this poem, the more it seems like this God is a minority figure who is subjected to the whims of the police state, or is targeted for oppression in some way. Like the narrator says, a God knocked unconscious by the billy club of a policeman at a demonstration. What kind of demonstration was this God at? Certainly one for someone's rights, or a God who pisses out of fear before the flaring electrodes of torture. And so, someone doesn't appear to like this God, even though they represent like the common person, and it's very Jesus-like in nature. This God that Alarcon has created in his mind, or that he's wishing for, because Jesus was a common man. He in the Passion of Jesus Christ, he was tortured and subjected to extreme punishment and ultimately crucified. And so it seems like he wants to bring that God back, that God who fights for the common people, and who those in charge don't really like, because if those in charge are claiming to like God and whatnot, maybe that God is on their side and not really. That image of God isn't really for the common people. It's meant for the rich rather than the poor or the suffering. And so it seems like Alarcon is saying he wants this change, this new God, and it's very interesting because he's describing very human stuff. And in the Bible, it's said that God, or man, was made in God's image. And so by saying that he wants a more godlike God, perhaps Alarcon is suggesting that he wants a human God. Like, he doesn't want to worship a mighty, like, hugely powerful, omnipresent deity. Perhaps he just wants to worship his fellow man. Worship the people who are suffering, worship the people who need help, so that you can focus on their needs and help them and make the world a better place in that way. I think that's one interpretation of the poem, but there might be a lot of different interpretations, as this is pretty open. So those are my thoughts on Prayer Oracion by Francisco X. Alarcon, a pretty solid poem, one that I recommend that you check out. I really like Alarcon's style. He writes in very short lines, like hitting you very hard, like with these ideas, and it's like whiplash at times. So like I feel like that I've read a couple of poets who do that, and I typically like that over writing like long verses, because it doesn't flow as much with longer verses, I think. But I found greatness and a mixture of styles. So I don't think I have one preference one way or another. But yeah, this poem and his Alarcon's poetry is pretty solid. I'm going to recommend that you go out and read it. Check out an interesting LGBT poet for Pride Month if you're interested in that. And so make sure, if you read this before, or you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about Alarcon's poetry. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this poem, this poet, and Poetry Thursday, so we can get more people doing it on BookTube. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and godlike travels. Farewell.